Ella, Bruce mentioned about changing the driver. Do you think it would be a good idea if we put women in the driving seat a bit more often?
I don't even need to answer that. I think if we start centering women, but mothers in our communities, then we'd start to see a real change in the world. And I think if we start seeing farmers and people who tend the land as more successful than the CEOs that are robbing us in big banks, then we'd also be able to see a change. You know, this is about belief systems, and that's where we come back to the big system, but our internal belief system, which is also driving us to make the profit and get the accumulated wealth. You know, our old people were so connected, they didn't have to hoard wealth the same way that people in this country hoard wealth when there is so much to share.
I was hoping your answer was going to be a lot longer, was going to give me time to come up with another question.
I can keep going.
No, that's what we're here for. Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, a big part of my work is reconnecting women back to the land, and I do that because I'm coming from an embodied experience of being a woman, and I think we need to start walking in the world with more integrity and start realizing that our lived experiences are our teachers, or those that we trust, their lived experiences are our teachers, and not what we're consuming by the other people out there that are maybe trying to convince us to do something else.
You have to go to a bookshop to see the number of publications that women are writing on in this space, and it's a wonderful thing, and it's about time. Bruce, if we were looking at the Australian landscape, pick maybe down Victoria, down your way, 10 years' time, if things went the way that you'd like it to go, we'd like it to go in a positive direction, what would we be looking at? Just sort of describe the landscape, the activities.
10 years isn't very long, but after the fires, when the canopy was gone down on the farm, that spring we got grasses that we'd never seen before. We had redleg, we had speargrass. We ended up with a sheath sedge, which I'd never seen in my life. They all came back after the fires. Where had that seed been? Who brought it in? It came because of sunlight coming through the forest. So in 10 years' time, what we're hoping for on the farm is we're going to bring the forest back to the 10 or 12 trees to the acre that the old people had, and so that the food will be on the forest floor. And a lot of people are going to be appalled by this. After the fires, all the orchid aficionados in Mallacoota, and they are a large group, they thought it was the end of the world. And I said, you'll have the best orchid season you've ever had in your life. And that's what happened. We saw an orchid that had not been seen for 70 years because of fire. Now, where the massive Mallacoota fire hit, that wasn't a fire, that was an explosion. That's what destroyed 70 houses in the town. My farm escaped that. That column of hot air and ash didn't fall on the farm, but it did fall on poor old Mallacoota. So that is the kind of fire we're trying to avoid. The fire that went through the farm went through slowly enough for us to continue to fight it, but it was also insufficiently hot to kill the mycorrhizals in the soil and to kill orchids and to kill grass seed. So all of those things have come back up. It's a miracle. We've got orchids growing amongst our kangaroo grass now, which has meant that we have to harvest differently. In 10 years' time, we're going to try and bring our whole farm back to 10 trees to the acre. We're trying to manufacture a harvesting machine which will allow us to move through that forest in between those trees and harvest those grasses which we haven't seen in 250 years. So this is we're hoping, a way of showing Australia that you can have your forest and your food as well without separating the two. But also in in terms of land ownership, what our old people did so well was they never separated the spirituality from the economy. And I think we need to bring those two together. Doesn't mean to say we have to pray like a parliamentarian before the opening of Parliament, but it does mean we have to revere our earth. We have to be spiritual farmers, and not to allow other people to laugh up their sleeve at us, but to say this principle has 120,000 years of positive science behind it, and that's what the old people did.
Damon, what sort of role does food play in the ecological challenges that we're currently facing globally? So, sorry, can you answer that in like 30 seconds?
Yeah,
please?
sure, no worries, mate. Massive, thank you.
Over to you, Bruce. No.
Yeah, it's, like, especially in our country, we talk a lot about emissions and energy and whatnot, but energy is about 33% of our emissions. We're really not talking about agriculture as much as we should be. And I guess the interesting thing about agriculture as an industry is that just as much as it's a net emitter of carbon, it has the opportunity to be a net sequester of carbon. So it actually is an industry that can be flipped on its head and be used for good. And I think sometimes we get a little too reductionist and just talk about carbon, but I think the life in our soils, the biodiversity in the soils is what we're desperately craving. And it's, what do you know, it's the same biodiversity as in our own guts. And if we don't have a healthy soil, we don't have a healthy population. And of the 300,000 plants that we could eat in the world, we eat 200, So this kind of narrow mentality that we've been applying is destroying our landscapes, because we're destroying rich integrated systems and planting rows of one crop. And that's exactly what we're feeding ourselves. And what often isn't talked about as well is the role of water, especially in global warming, that we have, our lands are so thirsty, they're parched. And so a great way to get them back in, the water back into there is to plant more vegetation, these cover crops. We know now the bacteria leave the trees and actually create clouds and create rain. So we need to be covering our lands again. And we have an opportunity now to not just do it with these single crops, but there's incredible studies coming through. There's one recently about 700 edible trees that we can eat now, including the bark and the leaves. And some of these leaves, like the mulberry, has twice the nutritional value of any store-bought vegetable that we can get, the leaves. So these trees are exactly what we need to fix our ecological crisis, but they're also full of the minerals and nutrients that we're deficient in as a human species. So that's why I see this moment as such a gift. Like, we really have everything right there if we're willing to embrace it, because we can turn around our health and the health of the planet.
Bruce, you just mentioned spirit, economics and spirit. How do we approach, or how would you approach it, or how does one approach farmers, conventional industrial farmers, or even regenerative farmers who are more practicing than sort of potentially in the spirit of it? How do you approach that conversation or that topic?
Slowly. I think many farmers are already there. They're thinking these things themselves, and they might want to have a yarn about it. But the farmers who are resistant to these ideas, I don't think all we can do is suggest and hope. We can't legislate for these things, because legislation actually doesn't change people's minds. It just makes it illegal to do certain things. And that doesn't mean that those things go away. So we need to convince all people, and it may take time, and some people may take their beliefs to the grave, and that will be their right. But we, the people, can make it more difficult for destruction to take place. We the people can decide that those people who use our resources, such as miners and farmers, have to pay a dividend for that. And that will change everything. We don't want a very rich person in a yellow hard hat telling us what our land is worth. We need to set the price for it. We need to set a price on plastic so that the brown paper bag becomes competitive with the plastic bag again, and so that we're not pushing plastic out into the ocean and creating islands. Alexis Wright wrote a terrific novel, Capricornia, about the floating plastic islands in the world. We can eliminate that, and we can look after our great-grandchildren. So that I've veered away from the question, but I'm veering back now. We have to have a generous conversation and a loving conversation with the recalcitrant farmer, the one who's not going to change their mind. We have to love that farmer, but we just don't have to put up with their rubbish. Someone told me yesterday, and I thought it was Craig, but it wasn't, that there's going to be a 3 metre or 6 metre wall built in this district somewhere so that a swampland can be turned into a housing estate. Now, I don't know whether it's 3 metres or 6 metres, but you can imagine it's just going to be beautiful because it's right beside the road. And so this is a bloody ugly thing that is going to be built in our name, and so for more blocks of land. But what about the swamp? What about her, our Mother Earth? What have we done to her? So this is not about people getting houses. It's about looking after that swamp so that she can breathe, she can filter our water, she can create our birds and animals and fish, and our plants and our biodiversity. And as Damon said, we are what we eat. And if we start reducing our biodiversity, we start reducing ourselves and our own health. And we don't want to do that. So when we meet opposition, we shouldn't act like a political party and condemn and ridicule and undermine the other person. We should love them to their grave. We just don't have to believe them.
Can I add something? I think also along with that, we need to put pressure on federal and state governments because we are in a housing crisis as a region, and we are finding a lot of single mothers and those in low socioeconomic situations being pushed out on the fringes. Now, this isn't our council's problem. It's actually a state and federal problem where we need to take it to our government and say, we need subsidized land that can be subdivided, not at an extortionary price that normal people cannot pay. We have to be able to have infrastructure put on. We have so much land in the Northern Rivers that's not being used that can have affordable housing in it. But therefore we will be building communities, and therefore we will be revolting probably against what the mainstream wants us to be doing, which is the white picket fence system, keep you alienated so you can consume more.
Here, here.